Jeff, you are likely baffled and upset by what you have just experienced, but all will become clear, I hope, by the end of this correspondence. First and foremost, I'd like to once again offer condolences on the passing of your wife. This statement may prove to sound counterintuitive after you have read the remainder of this letter, but I truly do empathize and sympathize with you and your loss. It does not negate the other emotions I hold for you in the least. The jealousy, rage, pity, despair, I feel all swirl into a whirlwind of confusion, even after so many months of analyzing and praying over the loss of our mutual friend. It's a good thing that some people still take the time to check the spam folders in their email accounts. Jeff Bowman always checked his, and usually found something interesting that he would have otherwise missed. Today was a message from his mutual friend of his and late wife, Erin. A man named Kevin. Kevin something. Truth be told, Kevin was much closer to Erin than he was to Jeff. And that was fine, but the two sometimes used to email each other interesting news stories or games, sometimes videos. This particular message appeared to have been sent several times in the past week or so. Jeff simply thought that the message contained some especially funny video or amusing game, and Kevin wanted to make sure it got through. It was a bit strange to get a message from Kevin out of the blue like this. They hadn't really spoken much since the funeral. Honestly, Jeff had always wondered if his wife had a little bit of a crush on Kevin. Jeff never worried about it too much. At 27 and 24 years old, when she died, he and Erin had been married for a few years. And if she had a little crush on another guy, it didn't make him too jealous or threatened. The subject of the email, "Hey man, check this out," was vague enough that Jeff had no idea what was in it, only noting that it had several attachments. The email read that the attachment contained a few cracked Steam games and a bootleg copy of the new Avengers movie that wasn't coming out for another week or so. The cracked games included titles from Counter-Strike and the Dead Island series, as well as two standalones, Goat Simulator and Huniepop. Not being much of a PC gamer, Jeff was only vaguely familiar with Goat Simulator and Huniepop, and thought of them simply as novelty games. But free is free, so he downloaded and installed all the games. Ghost Simulator was pretty self-explanatory, but all he knew about Huniepop was it was some kind of H-dating sim. Whatever that was. He knew it had to do something with naked anime chicks, and that was enough to pique his curiosity. So, after a quick glance into the life of an adventurous goat, he started up the game with the naked chicks, intending to play for a bit before watching the unreleased Avengers sequel. Forbidden fruit, as they say. Huniepop started with a jaunty tune in the image of a harem's worth of busty, western-looking anime girls. A promising start, although he and Erin had checked out a few hentai videos early in their marriage one drunken night. Well, truth be told, only Jeff had been drunk. Erin had mostly giggled and made fun of the inane plots and ludicrously proportioned women. Jeff played along, too embarrassed to admit that he thought that the flick was actually pretty hot. This was the type of game he would likely have hidden from his wife if she was still around. Or tried to, at least. Jeff played through the first tutorial round and it became apparent that the main gameplay was going to be based on puzzle matching, along the lines of Candy Crush or Bejeweled. Aside from some Dr. Mario and columns and the obligatory Tetris binge in his childhood, Jeff had never really played many tile-likes, and didn't know whether or not he liked them. As he continued to play through the dates in Huniepop, it became apparent that he did in fact like the style of game. So much so that, although he intended to play for only an hour or so, until 10 at the latest, he would then watch the pirated Avengers film. Turns out he would end up staying in the world of Huniepop until just past midnight, without realizing how much time had passed. I need not to remind you of the relationship the three of us had. I think you and I know more about the other than we ever let on. And Erin is common denominator in the equation. If a man doesn't have his pride, his sense of self-worth, if he lies in bed at night contemplating the day and can put a mental check mark next to each task he intended to fulfill, save for one, night after night, what is his quality of life? When one realizes that good enough, despite one's best intentions, has never actually been good enough, what should be the next course of action? The following day, Jeff could barely keep his mind focused during his therapy session, or the court-ordered Alcoholics Anonymous meeting that came after. He was preoccupied with the thought of getting back to his computer to ask and answer more questions with his digital girlfriends. By the time it came to hold hands and recite the Lord's Prayer at the end of the AA meeting, he was ruminating over what drinks to buy each of his eager, sex-deprived lady friends when he met them at the bar. Their favorites were conveniently listed in the Honeybee, the in-game mobile database of girls, but Jeff thought it would be good to mix things up for them as well. Turning home that afternoon, the plan had been to watch The Avengers: Age of Ultron, then play some more Huniepop. About 30 minutes into the pirated movie, Jeff realized that he hadn't been paying attention at all and barely knew what was going on. He had decided to finish the flick later, after a few dates. Before starting the game up, he shot a quick text message to Kevin, thanking him for the movie and the games, the dating sim in particular. The response NP would go unread until after the Huniepop session was done a few hours later. Jeff had formulated a strategy for playing the game. By this time, he had done some Google research and learned that after a few successful dates with a certain girl, he can take her back to her room for a bonus sex round. That the point was in fact to bet each of the available girls, as the difficulty of the rounds increased. His master plan was to play until every available girl was at the stage where one more good date round would result in the sex round, and then go through each of the girls one by one in-game night at a time. He had decided to go after the Japanese girl, Aiko, then try for the blue-haired gamer girl, Nikki, next. It may seem odd to you to be spoken to about pride from a man who was your late wife's paramour in the final year of her life. I imagine this information comes to you as a minor shock. I'd be surprised if you didn't at least suspect that Aaron was not being entirely faithful to you. But I bet on some level you were certain. Young married couples rarely last these days, all things considered. You are fairly lucky as far as cuckolds go. I'm clean and discreet. At heart, I'm a good guy. And despite the fact that we hadn't known each other very long, I think you're probably not too bad either. Otherwise, Erin wouldn't have felt it necessary to keep you in her life. But it could have just been guilt. I wonder at this point if you even put any of the pieces together. I'm sure you remember the date, as far as the game is concerned. The name of the month doesn't matter, but it was a Thursday the 9th. Did that mean anything to you? For the past year, your wife and I have been in what I would like to call a wonderful, albeit abnormal, relationship. It may have started out as a sex thing, but it evolved into so much more. The fact that she had known you for so long and really had only ever dated you had her in a kind of blissful ignorance. I brought her to a state of blissful awareness. She seemed to think that a life of unlimited promises from a man who drinks and plays video games every day was what marriage was all about. I didn't steal your love away. You pushed her out and took her for granted. Whether she ended up leaving you or not, her wavering faith was inevitable. I can go on and on about how your faults and my strengths, but it really doesn't matter, especially now. Nothing can bring your wife back. I know that you've suffered in this. How could you not? But that isn't enough. I'm I'm not talking about justice or revenge or anything that dramatic. I'm talking about evening up a little bit. The night she lost her life, the night that you were driving back from some dipshit party with a BAC of .21, a night of mutual regret for all involved. Do you remember that I do volunteer work sometimes? That my main job is driving ambulances and emergency vehicles? You know I was one of the first responders on the scene. Not that it made any difference. Part of the game involves talking with each of the players' potential mates, asking and answering questions to earn honey, one of the game's forms of currency, the other being called money. The questions the player may ask range from inane, "What's your favorite color?" to the keystone of every successful relationship, "What cup size are you rocking?" Remembering the answers each girl gives these questions to helps the player earn more honey. Players are also periodically asked questions by the girls, requiring them to recall the information given in an earlier conversation, or just look up the answers online, or wishing to hear his or her response to a hypothetical or personal question. Things like, "What would you do if you found someone's wallet on the street?" and "How many girls are you seeing right now?" Sometimes Jeff found the questions to be fun, other times annoying, and sometimes just bizarre. From time to time, the game seemed to glitch on certain questions to ask or answer. The words would display on the screen, but there was no voiceover. This typically happened on what Jeff felt were the stranger questions. At one point, the game's Indian girl, Belly, asked, "Do you ever dream about it?" with no clarification. At another, the cheerleader Tiffany posed the query, "How much did you remember the next day?" These odd inquiries were not common, but still confusing and a bit off-putting. They seemed to pop up at random. Jeff was interested to see if correctly answering these was some kind of subplot or alternate gameplay mode that only a few people knew of. He hadn't read anything about other players encountering weird questions or glitches, but he knew that there was some hidden characters and Easter eggs in the game. It seemed that no one had figured this out yet, and he couldn't tell if he was playing through these segments correctly. He seemed to earn no honey from any of the answers or questions he posed. Eventually, he just began answering them randomly and moving on to the next. Not being very adept at tile-matching puzzle games, it sometimes took a while for him to achieve a successful date, and he preferred to stick to one girl at a time, attempting to win a date round with her before going to win another date with one of the other girls. He often found himself forgetting to use the power-ups he had earned. This made for a slow go of things, but Jeff was glad to stretch out the gameplay for a little bit longer. At certain points in the gameplay, an unknown new girl would show up in the selection menu, usually in the evening or nighttime. Her picture was always grayed out, but she was not listed as being asleep. Jeff thought that this must be one of the new unlockable characters in the game, and that he needed to do some kind of action at a certain time or place to get where he could finally meet her. Whenever this girl would show up in the Honeybee, he would attempt to give certain items to whichever girl he was with, to see if this unlocked the hidden character. This never worked, and after he went to visit another girl on a date, the mystery woman would be gone again. In some of the early research Jeffrey did in the game, he read something about the unlockable girls being a cat girl and some kind of alien woman. He stopped reading so as not to ruin the surprise of finding them or discovering other secrets. The unknown icon didn't look like it had whiskers or cat ears from what he could tell, so he decided it must be the extraterrestrial, or some other girl he hadn't read about. The more date rounds you win, the more hearts are displayed on each of the women's profiles. After a few days of playing, Jeff had gotten all the girls up to 3 hearts out of a possible 5. Though when a girl has 4 hearts, it is possible to take her to bed after a date night. The plan was to keep going on daytime dates until everyone had all 5 hearts filled. Playing in this manner made the experience last much longer. In the meantime, Jeff Bauman had started an additional save file on the game to attempt meeting the girls in a different order to see if it resulted in any changes in gameplay. There were no major differences of note, but this also served to extend the time he spent playing. In both save files, he encountered a few of the uncharacteristic questions, some the same and a few different. He came across one inquisition from Audrey, the quote-unquote mega bitch character, that read, "What was the best part?" with 3 choices of answers. No in-laws at Christmas, the bed all to myself, and no nagging about booze and dope. This quiz was one that struck Jeff rather sharply, as they seemed to relate to bachelorhood, which he recently had somewhat thrust upon him. But at least this question appeared to have some relation to the game, as the Audrey character openly uses illegal drugs, and one of the answers mentioned to them. Jeff chose the third option, and the reply came up, "At least you're honest, you son of a bitch." By the time anyone noticed the tire tracks leading into the woods, it was already after 9 a.m. You were hours into a blackout sleep, and she had long since split out, already starting to stiffen up. They think you wrapped around the maple tree around 3 or so, leaving plenty of time for your lovely wife to scream at you to wake up, grope fruitlessly for her cell phone, shout for help into the night, claw for the release on her seatbelt until her nails bent back and snapped away from the quick. I bet you were snoring. She said that you snored like a boar when you were drunk. You got to sleep and dream away the wee hours of the morning with barely more than a concussion. Erin didn't get that luxury. She was awake and aware until the late stages of hypovolemic shock started. Pinned in the passenger seat with a kinked spinal cord, she got to watch the sunrise while her severed but pinched femoral arteries tickled until she was cold and blue. There was something else that never got into the report, that you never heard about. She had enough room to move her arm a little, enough to reach a few things, like the still functioning car lighter, and a few things in the center console. One of these things was one of your hidden joints. She once told me that 2 out of the 3 times she tried smoking pot a few years ago turned out awful. The other got her pretty relaxed. I guess at one point she decided that you weren't going to wake up, and there wasn't any help coming, so she lit it up and took a few drugs. Found the roach stuck to her shirt and a congealed stream of blood and vomit. You can only hope that it's somewhat eased her in her last moments on the planet. At last, the time came when Jeff could begin taking his digital girlfriends on night dates, and hopefully getting the bonus sex rounds. As silly as it may have sounded to others, Jeff had, knowing he had a night off to play the game, picked up a bottle of Chavez Regal Scotch for the occasion. Before the car accident, it was not uncommon for him to have a few drinks and play some video games, and since the publicity of the wreck and general knowledge in the community that he had been attending a 12-step meeting, he tried to keep his drinking more hidden than ever. He had driven about 40 miles out of his way to hit a liquor store where he and his car wouldn't be recognized. The save file he loaded started him out on a morning, and he sat out to chat with some girls just before taking the Asian girl Aiko on a date night. Twice when he started talking to different women before dating began, he was met with a question screen with no real text on it, just series of ellipses and the girls making their disappointed faces. He thought he must have done something wrong in playing the game up to that point, but it didn't really seem to be affecting the main flow of things. He hoped it didn't affect the dates. In-game evening turned into night, and he met up with Aiko at the bar and lounge stage. He used the money he had accrued to buy his date a few drinks, starting off with some sake, her favorite, and later some wine. As he dragged and dropped the static booze icons of his potential lover's face, prompting such realistic replies as, "That was a pussy drink. Hit me with something stronger." Jeff poured himself a neat scotch and gulped the smooth amber depressant. After a bit of schmooving, Jeff asked the Japanese college professor out on a date. The puzzle round at Vinny's restaurant went very well, and Jeff got the required score to win, using 17 of his 20 allotted moves, resulting in Aiko making the offer to come over tonight for a private lesson. Jeff would not have refused the offer, even if had been given the chance to. For a few seconds between the date round fading out and the appearance of the text indicating the change location of your bedroom, a corrupted image appeared on the screen and flickered before the bedroom started. It wasn't there for long enough to make sense of it, but it appeared to be just jumbled up collage of the game's images. At long last, it was time for Jeff Bauman to be stripped of his digital virginity. The mechanics of the bonus round were slightly different from the normal dates, in that all the tiles matched give the same amount of points, and the total score was constantly decreasing. It was made for a race against the clock feel, a mad dash to match as many tiles as quickly as one could achieve. Jeff, playing with a mouse, was a bit hampered by having to click and drag all the tiles where he wanted them to be, where a touchscreen would have probably been more optimal for speed. No matter, he was determined to max out the pleasure meter and win the bonus round. Jeff hadn't realized that as he was scanning the tile grid, trying to plan 2 and 3 moves ahead, he had begun to sweat and biting his top lip with increasing ferocity. When he crested the halfway mark on the pleasure meter, he barely even noticed that the bra his inanimate, computerized lover was wearing disintegrated and her shiny, high-definition breasts were full on display. His towel mashing became more frenetic, and Aiko's moans increased in frequency. Before he could fill the pleasure meter and begin to climax the oversexed professor, his monitor started flicking, glitching. Before he could register what was happening, the screen had gone black. Not sure if you knew about this, but it also looked like she used the car lighter to try to ignite some papers and the owner's manual. We found a few burned up napkins, and the owner's booklet with signed corners a few feet from the wreck. I guess she was trying to start a fire to raise some smoke signal to signal anyone in the vicinity. It didn't work. She must have realized that starting a fire could have burned the 3 of you alive. Probably would have slept through it, but she was still awake at that point. Can you imagine the desperation, the loss of hope that would make a person consider that? I try not to think about it too much. Blinking his dry eyes, Jeff unclenched his jaw and leaned back from the monitor. As a formality, he poured another tall scotch into his tumbler and swallowed it in a single opening of his throat. Taking no time to enjoy the taste of the pricey booze, he hissed the burn out through his teeth, then assessed the situation. Before he was able to start clicking around to test the computer, the game returned to the screen. The date appeared in white text as usual, followed by an image that was familiar but also unique. What Jeff saw was a new girl, one he hadn't encountered or seen pictures of before. She was standing in the park at night looking downtrodden. She was built differently than any of the other girls in the game. She looked overweight, dumpy even, wearing jeans and a black t-shirt with a Judas Priest logo. This detail is what struck Jeff, a plain black Judas Priest shirt, pretty much identical to the one that his wife owned. It was at this point that he glanced down to the lower left corner of the screen and saw the icon of the unknown girl. She was now in color and had a name, Erin. Shock is a word that gets a lot of use in daily conversation, but it is the most appropriate word for Jeff's reaction to seeing a Japanese anime interpretation of his dead spouse in an adult puzzle dating simulator. He couldn't find his breath for several seconds, and there was an icy sensation of pins and needles blooming steadily just from under his sternum. He gaped at the unhappy-looking woman and noting her bright emerald green eyes, a shade of contact lenses that Aaron sometimes wore, her deep violet hair, the color she had dyed on New Year's Eve 3 years ago, the color she always said, only half jokingly, that she wanted it to be dyed permanently. The physique that he initially noted as being dumpy was in fact fairly accurate reflection of the way Erin had looked for the last few years of her life. Following a series of surgeries, she put on quite a bit of weight and was never able to lose much of it. He was gazing at, all things considered, as an accurate representation of her as he could possibly have expected. But why? After regaining some of his senses, Jeffrey had another drink, this time foregoing the glass in favor of sloppily kissing the glass rim of the bottle. The cold sensation in his insides began to abate a little, and he started looking at the rest of the game screen. He made note that the normal game menus were listed, but not at all functional. Many of the buttons did nothing when clicked. The heart meter was empty, and were the hunger and intoxication meters. He was able to check Aaron's profile, and thus buried any doubts he could have had hoped to have any sort of coincidence about this. All the information was on the screen. Her name, her married name, his name were there, her late winter birthday, job at the gift shop, short stature, even the size of her bra was dead on. He couldn't scroll through the rest of the Honeybee in-game app, but he had no need to. Everything he had already seen, enough to send his head spinning. Again, he saw that none of the hearts were filled, and yet one of the only options he seemed to be able to click was the ask on date, which stated that it would be on the night date instead of a first date. The only other thing to do seemed to be to talk to her, even though it was listed that no honey points would be awarded for doing so. Against his better judgment, he clicked the light blue button to engage her in Huniepop's version of the conversation. And yes, I did say the three of you. That was not a typo. While you spent the past few months in a haze of booze and pot, Aaron told me that you had become, as they say, comfortably numb everywhere. Maybe you didn't find her sexy since she gains weight. Maybe you just lost your libido. Maybe, but she hadn't lost hers. You may not have noticed, but she told me that she had been waking up in the night and getting sick, that she was weeks late. I've got no doubt who her father would have been. The plan was to tell you together, the two of us and you. It seemed obvious to me, but I guess you guys couldn't see that things were through. Although she told me about your problems in bed, she had also once mentioned you still had a fondness for more animated girls. I had a feeling that you would eventually get around to playing Huniepop. I don't know shit about programming, but my little brother does. And I am a fair artist. I just wanted to tell you, to show you what I saw and experienced these past few months in a way that might actually make an impact on your slowly pickling brain. In a way you have a right to know everything. Now you do. Maybe now I can get some closure. As for you, you're on your own. I imagine you have more questions, but I honestly don't care now. I sympathize with you for your loss, but I also never want to see or hear from you again. I hope we can at last grant each other that. With sympathies, Kevin Randall. A message popped up in the text window. It read, "How long has it been?" with 3 choices of answers in the usual fashion. One was 6 months or so, the next almost a year, and finally over a year. Swigging another few fingers worth of scotch, he clicked the second option. Immediately another question appeared. Are things easier now? Jeff thought about his answer. His life was most definitely a bigger mess than it had ever been, especially with the court orders, fines, and guilt. He chose the second answer, reading, "No, things have only gotten worse." This prompted a text reading, "I sincerely wish that both of us had thought of that beforehand." Afterward, the main set of options came back up, except that talk with her was no longer a clickable choice. The only other option was to go on a date. There was a part of him, a really large, glaring part, that told Jeff to just stop and go to bed, not to even think about what was happening until morning. But the slightly greater majority of his brain felt compelled to click the date button. Jeff was experiencing a strange combination of awe and despair. He hated thinking about his wife and what had happened to her, replaying everything he could, remembering about the night of the accident in a loop that sometimes robbed him of sleep for days on end. There was also a sense now that he was now in this. He was already ruminating about his current conundrum, and well as experiencing the familiar undertow of shame that he feared would tear him apart if he ever really sat and thought about it. If he didn't at least see this through to its end, he would have yet another sense of unfinished business to throw on the ever-growing pile. The best he could do for his conscience was to play this out a little longer before analyzing it. He clicked the date button. The images on screen disassembled and faded to black as usual. The standard text faded in, announcing that the setting was changing back to the bedroom. It appeared that there would be no formal date around this time. The bedroom appeared, and the gameplay grid and girl slid into view. Erin was standing on the screen, looking sad or disappointed, like she was in the previous screen. But this time, in the fashion of the game, she was standing in her underwear. Whereas the in-game girls typically had sexy matching undergarments, she was instead simply wearing an unflattering ensemble of a black padded bra and dull blue panties. There was no soundbite from her, as there is in the standard bedroom rounds before gameplay commences. She just stood there for a few seconds before the tiles dropped into the grid. The tiles themselves were not the standard mix of varied colors and shapes, but were limited to the two varieties. That of the Broken Hearts tile, which dropped the player's score, and a new, round red tile that Jeff didn't recognize, as there were only two types. It was inevitable that there would occur several three-tile matches without any player input. In fact, Jeff found that if he tried to click on the puzzle grid, nothing happened. The tiles just kept matching, disappearing, and being replaced from the top. And despite this, there was no score accumulating. The counter under the tile grid simply read a static 0 out of 0 the entire time. As there was really nothing to do, Jeff just watched the tiles match and drop, trying to figure out what the red tile tokens were. They were constantly in motion, so it was hard to get a good look, but they appeared to Jeff to look like smudged crimson eyeballs, or little red-toned sonogram images. The more he studied them, the more they looked to him like the latter. Shifting his gaze back to the right side of the screen, he saw the half-naked girl, his wife, staring back at him, never blinking, never speaking, unlike what the girls did in the other puzzle rounds. After almost a minute of watching the tiles fall and match themselves, Erin's image began to change. It flicked a few times and then was replaced by a distorted version of itself. The new Erin remained static, her skin now pale and tinted blue. There were dark circles forming under her increasingly glazed-over eyes. A small bruise appeared in the corner of her mouth. The tiles continued to fall as this new pale woman stared out from the monitor. Jeff stared, barely comprehending what he was seeing. His hand had moved from the computer mouse and was limply covered his slightly open mouth. Almost before he could register what he was seeing, the image of his wife began to change again. The skin took on a more pallid hue and became mottled with bruises and spiderweb of veins. Splotches of purple and gray and sickly green covered her body. Dark streaks soon showed across the forehead, and from the nose of the girl, inky, clotted blood. 2 deep gashes were visible, one on her leg and the other on her forearm, oozing rivulets of gore. The sight was almost more than Jeff could take. He hadn't been awake when the ambulance and police had shown up at the scene of the car accident that had taken Erin's life. But he was aware that she had lain there dead for several hours when he was passed out. The thought was something that he tried to push from his brain every day, but now, it was here, staring at him with glassy eyes. He closed his eyes tightly, and a tear ran from between the lids down to the crease of his nostril. When he opened his watery eyes again, the tile stopped drooping, and the sound cue for winning a date round played. The word success appeared over the grid as usual, but there was no closing dialogue. From his minimal research on the game, he knew that following the bedroom round, a graphic and lewd picture was meant to appear on screen. What Jeff saw when the screen faded back in made his insides sink and brought a new wave of choking, dry sobs. The image that materialized was not an anime-style drawing of a naked woman, no, but instead a dark and corrupted picture of a woman lying face up in a patch of dead grass. Dark streaks running from her nose and a gash on her forehead. Gray veins could be seen creeping up her neck, and her eyes were darkly bruised. This must have been a photograph taken from the scene of the car wreck. This was Erin before she was taken to the morgue, mere hours after her life had been ceased. Jeff buried his face in his hands and coughed out low, moaning sobs. Huniepop closed itself and the standard desktop returned. There was a new notification from the email app in the tray.
Wow, so, yeah, this is the end of the cool creepypasta video of a pasta that is over 10 years old at this point. Wow. Yeah, so I remember when I read this one in the 4th grade, and now I'm like a grown-ass adult. And what inspired me to make this one was the Mudahar video, Some Ordinary Gamers, but unfortunately the original got privated. And I really didn't notice that it was until like 3 days ago when it was brought up from the release of this video. So, no offense, but I saw all the other readings of this pasta, and it's one thing that I knew that it sucked, but it was another that I didn't want this one to go. I didn't want this one to go out without it, receiving its flowers. And you know what, I thought I did somewhat of a good job reading this one. It's a really good pasta. I really liked it. And I gotta say that none of this would be possible without my good friend Ulti. He was the one who lended me all of his footage that you saw here, and personally, I would not have been able to do it. I mean, I own the game from a gag gift on Steam, but just like Jeffrey, I do not care for tile matching games at all. And this video in itself is pretty unusual. This is my longest vid with some actual elbow grease put into it, and I guess don't expect that. I mean, I guess it depends on how this turns out, and if people really like the way I read pastas. This is something I concurrently do with just my friend group and stuff, because I'm told I have a very normal white dude podcasting voice, so I thought I'd use that to my advantage here. I got a few more pastas that I would totally be down to read that are really good. But again, it just depends on how this video receives and how much free time I have. Right now I'm super duper tired, so I'm about to go to bed. Yeah, thanks to Ulti giving me all this footage. I don't know. Maybe this video will come outdated when the Some Ordinary Gamers video gets unvaulted, who knows. But thank you so much for listening. Good night.